Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for being on time. Wow, the floodgates have opened here. We're excited to have you here. We'll give it another couple of minutes. I'm a big believer in begin on time and end on time, but we will certainly give it a few minutes. We're at 160 people already, so this is exciting. Good to have everybody here. We will give it a few minutes just to let everyone filter in. All right. So little interlude there. I saw your question, Ron. Thanks for putting that in. Tell your wife I'm very disappointed that she couldn't make it, but yes, we will gladly share the recording afterwards. And I'll give you the methodology to do that. The short answer is when you complete the survey at the end, it'll give you access to all of the recordings, not just of this webinar. This one won't be live and published probably until sometime over the weekend, but we will get that out to everybody. So for those of you just jumping on, and I see we're slowing down a little bit in terms of people filtering in, but we'll give it another minute or so and get started. So thanks for being here. Again, thanks for being on time. All right, I see 7:04 on the East Coast, so I am going to go ahead and get started. Thank you for joining us. For those of you I may not know, my name is Brock Jolly, and I'm the founder of the College Funding Coach. And we've got two great guests for tonight's webinar. We've got Kathleen Glynn Sparrow from the College Coaches, often confused with the College Funding Coach. So, similar mindset there, I suppose. And Alexander Chip from Top Score Education. And so I'll give a little bit of their bio here in just a moment, but excited to have you here and really even more excited about tonight's content. Want to just give some housekeeping before we do dive in. Tonight's webinar will be roughly 1 hour. Both Kathleen and Alex are going to talk for about 20 minutes each, just as soon as I get off the proverbial stage here. And then we do want to leave about 10 minutes, maybe 15 minutes at the end for questions and answers. In the vein of Q&A, we would love to hear your questions. The goal of tonight, we've got a lot of people on tonight's webinar. We've got several hundred people on tonight's webinar. And so inevitably there are going to be a lot of questions. And so I'm always a little hesitant to say this, but please do give us your questions. I would ask that you put them in the chat rather than the Q&A. And the reason for that is then everyone can see your questions. If for some reason you've got a question that you don't want the entire audience to be able to view, you can direct those questions simply to the panelists, or there will be opportunities after the webinar this evening to follow up directly with me, with Alex, with Kathleen, with the folks from our team as well. So please do ask questions. This is your webinar. We want to give you lots and lots of value. I mean, this is going to be an action-packed 1 hour here in front of you. Lots of stuff to cover. Obviously, some of you thought the school year was about to end, but it's never a better time to be thinking about how to get prepared for not only next school year, but certainly the future schooling as well. And we see that you are in alignment with that as, again, we have several hundred parents on this evening's webinar. So excited to have you here. Please do ask questions. And then the last thing I would ask from you is when you leave tonight's webinar, please take 60, maybe 90 seconds at max. There's going to be a survey that pops up in your web browser. We'll also have a QR code at the end. I would simply ask that you take some time to complete that. It's going to do a couple of things. Number one, we love your feedback. The College Funding Coach, we do about 400 of these type of workshops every single year. We have what I always call our bread and butter workshop that I'll talk about in a second. But we do these type of specialty webinars, which dive a little bit deeper into topics like applying to schools, essays, standardized test prep, student loans, etc. Obviously, we'll dive into that a little bit this evening. And so we always want to get better. We want to figure out what's important to you. But the other thing too is when you complete that survey, it's going to open up what we call our mini vault. Our mini vault gives you access to lots and lots of tools, calculators, videos. Ron asked the question before, is this going to be recorded? We've got all of our past video archives there. So you can see just loads of information. If you ask me and ask our team at the College Funding Coach, in fact, we had a quarterly planning session this morning and we were talking all about how do we add more value. And so more on that as we go, hopefully. But just a little bit to dive in and give you some of the background and why we're here this evening. So those of you who landed here this evening from the College Funding Coach, and maybe you've been to one of those bread and butter webinars or live workshops at your child's school, we usually call that little known secrets of paying for college. That's sort of, again, I'll use the term bread and butter. That's our core curriculum. We talk through everything from finding the right fit, choosing the school, and really dive deeply into financial aid, how it works, how it doesn't work, what the process is, some of the strategies out there, either for maximizing or optimizing your financial aid eligibility, or for those families who say, I'm never going to qualify for need-based aid. How do you create the liquidity, the cash flow, et cetera? But why we're here today is, the way I always describe it is this. If you work with Kathleen and Alex and their organizations, as well as probably the counselors at your school or other resources, if your kids do their job, right, and maybe with the help of some folks like the college coaches or Top Score, look, they're going to be accepted in all likelihood at some pretty great schools. And the challenge that I believe that Kathleen and Alex and lots of college and career counselors at various high schools hear over and over and over and over again is, Kathleen, that's great. You got my kid into this awesome school, but how in the world are we going to pay for it? And that's really the function of the College Funding Coach. Our unique ability, our core focus is helping families figure out the strategies for being able to save and pay for college as efficiently and effectively as possible. So that's not why we're here tonight, but I just want to lay the groundwork and say, here's the important stuff. And look, we want to work together. We want to collaborate with organizations like these two fine organizations that we have here this evening to figure out how to make it a little bit easier for you, to help you figure out how you can make this journey, this maze, maybe this nightmare, into a little bit more of a dream, right? And really figure out ways that we can collaborate and give you the best options possible for your student and your family. So with that, let me go ahead. I'm going to introduce Kathleen and Alex. And the best way for me to do that is kind of read their bios. And I will say, when I did a webinar with Kathleen about a week ago, and Kathleen had this awesome bio. And so I should have really been proactive and returned the favor. But I think her bio really speaks for itself. She's just got a tremendous wealth of knowledge and experience that she brings to the table. So Kathleen Glynn Sparrow is the founder and head coach for the College Coaches. Previously, she was the director of college counseling at the McLean School in Potomac, Maryland. Kathleen also works at Stone Ridge in Bethesda, Maryland, both in college counseling as the head of the English department. She also served as director of college counseling at St. Andrew's Episcopal School in Potomac, Maryland. She taught at the Ben Franklin Academy in Atlanta, where she counseled students challenged with learning style differences, substance abuse recovery, and motivational issues. Kathleen earned her bachelor's degree from Duke University and her master's in education from Emory. Secondly, we've got Alex Chip. Alex founded Top Score Education, a boutique tutoring, test prep, and academic counseling company headquartered in the Washington, D.C. area in 2005. Over the past 17 years, Alex has tutored several thousand students in high school and college admissions testing, developed innovative project-based learning programs for students of all ages, and launched new branches servicing students in Miami, Durham. He is also a graduate of Duke University. So this University of Virginia graduate got a little bit worried that these Dukies were, teaming up on him. But nonetheless, Johns Hopkins, he has a master's in nonfiction writing. He lives in Washington, D.C. with his wife and 2 kids. So with that, Kathleen's going to go first. I'll give a little bit of a transition, and then we'll get Alex started. Please do. I see some people, just little clarification here. I see some people going in the Q&A. I will do my best to answer those. Alex will do the same while Kathleen's speaking. But if you could just try to keep it in the chat, that makes my job a whole lot easier. And we'll certainly try to get everything answered. So with that, Kathleen, let me turn it over to you.
All right. Thanks, Brock. I was thinking next time we do a presentation, you could throw in a couple extra degrees for me, maybe a couple of PhDs or something like that. No one would be the wiser. I mean, come on, I'm getting too old to get more degrees. So
perfect.
I think honorary works. Well, thanks for joining us tonight. I'm Kathleen from the College Coaches. I won't read to you this presentation tonight, but I'll give you a quick idea of what's coming your way. And you're out for an adventure. So here we go. Humor. You all might think there is nothing funny about the college process. And you know what? You're right. But a good sense of humor, a little bit of humor will go a long way. So you'll notice throughout the presentation, Alex and I really enjoy putting cartoons and memes. There will be some serious content, but every now and then take a breath and just see that there is humor in everything. For example, we have a well-meaning, of course, parent here reading the U.S. News and World Report Guide to America's Top Colleges to his cherub who is in bed with bug in eyes. So don't have your kids grow up too soon, and we'll talk about a timeline later. And on the right, of course, is the mom sending the kid off to school. Maybe it's time for a little space at home, especially after the pandemic. And then when he's ready to go to college, not quite the same feeling. All right, so things have changed, things are changing, but we will break it down for you tonight, what you need to know. So what are colleges looking for these days? Some things remain the same: grades, transcript, okay? They're looking for rigor, which means AP or advanced or honors courses where appropriate. It doesn't mean you have to be in high level everything. If you're a strong English student, maybe try pushing yourself to an honors or advanced AP level in that. If your school doesn't offer AP or advanced and has everything college prep level, that's fine too. The colleges will read you in the transcript, in the context of your school, okay? So the idea is to stretch but not break. It won't do anybody any good if your student has a ton of AP or honors classes and all the grades are going down, or worse, the students' mental health and physical health are going down. So look to the teachers for their advice. They'll recommend what level is next, and I would follow that. Also, if 9th grade does not go well, that is okay. Colleges are looking for an upward trend, which means 9th grade, they know you're adjusting. 10th grade, you're getting your feet on the ground. And by 11th grade, they want to see that academically you're cooking with gas. Rec letters remain important from teachers, and your college counselor at your school will also write a rec letter on your student's behalf. The essay remains important, possibly even more so during this test optional phase that we're in, or maybe it's not a phase, maybe it's going to stay for a while. We'll let Alex talk about that. The essay is also the face of the application. It tells you something more about the applicant than the application just can. Colleges also want to see your extracurriculars. Are you doing something outside of the classroom? It's not enough just to be a student. You need to get involved, because when you get to their classroom, their campus, they're going to want you to get involved too. They're not going to be the ones being in student council and all the clubs they want you to be. Demonstrated interest is a term some of you will know and some of you may not be aware of. It's fairly new. You don't have to worry about it at big state schools, but small to medium-sized school are looking to gauge how interested are you really in their college. Are you just tossing another app their way, or are you really genuinely interested? You can show interest through visits, emails, interviews, and a host of other ways. Why do they care about demonstrated interest? They're trying to protect their yield. Yield is the number of students who accept their acceptances. And the higher a college's yield is, the better it appears or more desirable it appears. And yield is a factor in the US News and World Report rankings, which I'm not a fan of and most college counselors aren't, but hopefully no one from US World Report rankings is on this call. Test scores, I will defer to Alex on that. He'll talk about that later. So how has the process changed? It's been a while, right? Since you've been through it, I'm assuming. I don't know who's out there. I can't see the audience, so I'm assuming you're all about college age ready parents. They apply to more schools, 8 to 12, which is pretty wild. When I was going through the process, I applied to 3 or 4 schools. We certainly didn't categorize school as reach, target, and likely. We made fun of our college counselor. She was some nutty lady who worked in the basement. Don't worry, my high school doesn't exist anymore. Nobody makes fun of me either, okay? This college counselor does not get made fun of. Actually, I do a lot. We talked about demonstrated interest as being a new thing. Some colleges will even monitor whether the students have opened emails, which is very big brothery. Pretty wild. Selectivity has changed. Schools that were easier to get into when you were applying may not be the same right now in this age. For example, Northeastern acceptance rate last fall, 7%. That's pretty remarkable. Their co-op program was their ticket to fame that really put them on the map. The University of Maryland, we likely have a lot of people from Maryland on the call tonight. Used to be, all right, well, we'll just apply to Maryland as our state school just in case. Now this year, their acceptance rate was around 42%. So just use your data and stay informed and don't bring your own, you can bring your fun childhood college memories to share with your cherub, but the data is really the directive here. And one thing remains the same, parents still drive their children crazy during the process. You can just ask my 2 kids. Okay, so will your kid get in anywhere with all this? The answer is yes, if your student must have a balanced list, okay? The term likely has replaced safety. Nobody wants to say safety anymore because they feel like it guarantees admission, okay? So now you say 2 likelies. And you must like your likely schools. Don't just chuck them on the list and say, oh, I don't even want to go there, but those are my likely schools. Too many good colleges out there to do that. It gives you the number here for reaches, 2 to 4, and the rest targets. Okay, how the heck do you know what's a likely, what's a reach, and what's a target? Okay, you can ask a college counselor like me, like your school college counselor, like another college counselor. You can use your high school's software. They'll have college counseling software like Naviance, Score, Maya Learning, and that will have school-specific data in it. For example, it'll show, I used to work at McLean School. It'll show how have McLean School students fared at these different colleges over the past 5 years. And then it will, the thing to keep in mind is those scattergrams reduce your student to 2 numbers, a test score if you have a test score and a GPA. It doesn't take into account all the other pieces of the app, the essay, your activities, whether you interview and things like that. But it is, this college counseling software is a good indicator of how students from your school with a similar profile have fared. I hope everyone's looking at the memes. You know, Alex and I spend a lot of time on the memes, so make sure you check those out. Okay, of course we have more memes. So timeline, when should you start so that you remain sane and your child remains sane? We're going to talk about that. When to begin and how. You should begin slowly. If you steamroll your teen at the start of the process, you're going to get these kind of answers. No, whatever, I don't know, I don't care, I don't care. Is this going to be over soon? Or maybe they have their earphones in and they're not even hearing you. So that's going to raise your stress level. It's going to raise their stress level. Okay. Instead, what I suggest is see when your teen is what I call emotionally available to talk. How do you know? Well, think about if you asked your son or daughter, hey, on Friday, I was thinking we might, maybe not Friday, because nobody wants to do anything on Friday if you're a teenager, unless it's fun. On Thursday, I was thinking we would go talk to a college counselor. What do you think? And if your student's head is about to pop off and they say, I cannot take on another thing, I'm behind on my Stranger Things, I have to get to Georgetown Cupcake, and of course do academics, then you know the student is not quite emotionally available, right? But on the other hand, if they say, sure, okay, sounds good, or that actually would be a good thing because I'm really worried about the process and some of my friends have started, then it might be a good time. 8th grade, this is not the time to start the college process, okay? This is more about finding your locker than finding your future, okay? Should be friendship, study habits, managing the time. They are, leaving middle school, getting ready to go to high school. They've got enough on their head. We don't bother them about their future at the moment. Grade 9, they should start to get involved in what they want to do. And what they want to do is important. If you played the ukulele in high school and you think that's what got you into college, I'm very excited for you. But if your cherub doesn't want to play the ukulele and you force him, her, or them to do that, that ukulele is going to gather dust in the corner, and every car ride to and from ukulele lessons going to be unpleasant. Let's say your cherub wants to do the trombone. Awesome. Let them belt it out in the marching band. And guess what? A lot of colleges have marching band scholarships, so you never know. Don't choose activities because they look good for college. Choose what you love and success will follow. If they follow what they're interested in, they're going to give it the time and talent to start developing those skills and passions. You don't need 15 activities. You don't have to start a bunch of clubs junior year. You don't have to do chess club, cheese club, Quidditch club. Just pick a few things you like and stick with it. Okay. And learning and grades, of course, are important in this year.
Hey, Kathleen, if I can just interrupt you for 1 second.
Sure.
We had a question from Deanna in the chat. She said, well, what if my student doesn't really have too many extracurriculars and it's getting towards the end? Alex and I both gave an answer, but I think you'd probably be better suited to give a more specific answer, perhaps.
Okay. Do you want me to peek at the answer or just roll with it?
No, just roll with it because you're probably going to agree with it, but go with it.
Okay, how much money do we have on this wager? Because I can't see the chat at the moment. If you're, I don't know what age, if it's getting towards the end, meaning the student, let's say the student is a junior, going to be a rising senior. So really this is your last summer. What I would do is have the student do something that they're interested in this summer, but that's also productive. Get a job. See if the student can shadow a family friend. Let's say he, she, or they are interested in business and your Aunt Joan owns a business. Maybe he, she, or they can go have lunch with Aunt Joan and talk about what does it mean to work in marketing, or what are some of the struggles of a business. So you can use that summer to definitely have downtime, and we'll talk about summers in just a second, but also to do something productive. How did I do that?
I think you nailed it. That's perfect. Thank you.
Awesome sauce. Okay. So I think I'm on summer slide, right? Downtime is important. Okay. These kids are coming off rigorous school years. They still have the vestiges of the pandemic and all of that impact on them and their families. So downtime is important. You do not want your student coming back in the fall exhausted. That nobody wins, especially the student. So downtime and then something productive. Okay, get a job. It can be whatever. Colleges love any job because it's somebody outside the family helping, trusting them with something. I should clarify though that family responsibilities, if you're an older sibling and caring for your younger siblings, driving them to things, babysitting, cooking, whatever, that also counts as a job to colleges, and they're clear about that. I just mentioned shadowing a family friend. You can do an internship. It can be paid or unpaid. It doesn't have to be the big NIH internship that 50,000 people are competing for. Just try something. That's what the colleges want to say. Are you trying something? You can volunteer at your church, your synagogue, your mosque. Anything goes. Take a class. It doesn't have to be for credit. It doesn't have to be 6 weeks. Just dip your toes into something. You can do a new hobby, music, art, baking. Teach yourself something. If you're a good baker, I bet Alex and I wouldn't mind giving you our address, and you can drop off some treats at our door tonight after the presentation would be just right. All right, grade 10, PSAT. The way I think about this is P for practice. What are you practicing? You're practicing sitting in a room for 4 hours, bubbling in circles. So much fun. No, it's not. But it does give you the sense of what a standardized test is like, and what is it like to sit there for that long. But that score does not go to colleges. A lot of people panic. Some of you haven't even learned the math and English yet. That's because the PSAT is actually developed for 11th grade. So P for practice. Summer we talked about, and you can visit colleges casually while on a trip. If you're going over the river and through the wood to grandmother's house, then, and she lives in Pennsylvania, maybe you're going to drive by Bucknell or Lafayette or Muhlenberg or Susquehanna. Just get a sense of place and space while you're there. Grade 11, academics are a priority. We talked about that upward trend. PSAT will be offered again. And those scores, again, do not go to colleges. They are for your use. And yes, there is a national merit qualifying as part of PSAT, but it is very difficult to get that. And you might be surprised that the money that comes with it is not a lot. You can actually get a lot more from merit aid, which is something that Brock and the college funding coach can coach you on. Time for test prep in 11th grade. If you're testing, thinking about college lists, official visits where you actually register online on the college website, and teacher recommendations. Right before senior year, it's time to write your essay. The reason why summer is best is your brain power is freed up from academics and extracurriculars. Yes, you're probably doing something during the summer, but you have more time to just think and breathe and write something that is meaningful about you. You'll complete the Common App, which is one application that works for nearly all colleges. It's not hard, it's online. And then you'll organize supplements. Supplements are these little evil paragraphs that colleges ask for that say, in 150 words, tell me why do you want to go to Tulane? Or in 150 words, tell me what's your favorite extracurricular and why. They're not hard, it's just one more thing to do. And then most college deadlines now are around 11/1. That's the target deadline of senior year. When I was applying, it was really January 1st. Now it's kind of shuffled up a little to 11/1, okay? All right, tips for visiting campuses. I've seen over 200 because I have no life. Just ask my kids, they would agree with you. But these are a few things that I do so that I can really get at, for lack of a more eloquent term, the dirt of college campuses. Like what is it they're not telling me? Because I want to know. This is a big investment. My kid's going to go here for 4 years. I'm going to spend at least $3 on tuition. So I got to know. So it's often a good idea for the parent to go on one tour and the student to go on another. Different tour guides will bring up different questions. Different groups will bring up different questions. And at the end, you can compare notes. Also, it is very good to have a little space from each other on some of these forced bonding trips. It's a good idea to try to meet the college rep who will read for your school while you're there. You can go old school on this and Google who is the college rep for Maryland for Emory, and that name will come up. And you can email that rep ahead of time, say when you'll be on campus, and ask if you can say hello before or after the 2 o'clock tour. That rep that you meet is the same one that will come to your school, the same one that will be at a local college fair, and most importantly, the same one that will read your application, advocate for you during the process. So if you've met that rep 3 times and another student with a similar profile hasn't met the rep, advantage to you. I pick up a copy of the student newspaper, or I look at one online to see the issues students are fired up about, but admissions isn't mentioning, like safety or racial tensions, things that are a big, very important deal that you want to be aware of. And you can keep visual and verbal notes in your phone. Take pictures, put little notes. The colleges will blend together. It'll help you keep them separate, and it'll also help you when you have to write the supplements and they say, why do you want to go to our school? You can pull up your notes. All right, this is my last slide, so I hope Alex is getting fired up. This slide, I have to give credit to my colleague, Greg Schneider, who's part of the college coaches team. He did a lot of the writing for this. I'm gonna have to read it because this is unbelievable. Grab a double shot chai half-calf latte with 1/3 foam in the dining hall so you can casually observe student life. But as silly as that is, there's truth to it. You want to go to the cafeteria and see what's the vibe during lunch. Is everyone plugged in and working furiously during their meal, or are they unplugged, having a conversation? Because you want to have balance, right? You want to go to the library. I cannot tell you how many libraries I've seen where it's social coffee shop on the first floor. That's fine. But as you go up, nobody's working. I've even seen Students with no backpacks. I know everything's digital, but I mean, maybe a pencil or a laptop in there, just say. Parents, you can go meet with financial aid office if you like. Call ahead of time, let them know you would like to chat. Never too early to plan. And as Greg says, pick up change while you're on campus because every little penny helps. Brock, you probably should introduce that picking up change thing in your next presentation. I'm sure that would be helpful. And then students, you want to check out the local environs. What's nearby? What are you going to be doing on weekends? And if there's no Chipotle, think deeply. Deeply. Are you really going to be able to do 4 years of college without Chipotle? I don't know. With that very serious question, I will turn it over to Alex and Brock. And Alex, I'll defer to you. You want me to answer some questions in the chat by typing or to hold those to the end?
Yeah, I would say, Kathleen, why don't you, just to make sure we kind of stick on track for time, there were a couple of great questions in there that I think Alex and I tried our best to give a valiant effort, but they're right up your alley, obviously. You know, questions about paid work versus volunteer work and timing. Why don't you just plow through there and just, I tend to put the person's name in there just so they kind of see it. But reply to all so that everybody gets it. And, we'll try to hit anything at the end that we want to recap on.
Perfect. Excellent. And Alex, do you want me to advance slides for you?
Sure, that'd be great.
All right.
Yeah, I'd say, Alex, why don't you go ahead and take it away? And I'll just segue by saying this, right? It's like, okay, first things first, cast a broad net. And we got lots of good questions here about community colleges and in-state and out-of-state and private schools. And I'll go back to one of the things Kathleen said. And, when probably she and Alex and I were all looking at schools, and probably a lot of you parents who are on the line, we didn't apply to 15 or 20 colleges, right? And, my additional dig on that school down in Durham, North Carolina would be, Duke was a whole lot easier to get in back in the day, right? Now we've got a basketball team that puts them on the radar every year, and obviously a great school. But, I think trying to create the process, cast that broad net, figure out the schools. Obviously, one of the easy ways that schools have of sort of creating a line in the sand is standardized test prep. And I would submit to you that probably we haven't had more changes in the standardized test prep landscape, not just in the past 2 years, but really in the last 3 or 4 years. So much has evolved, and it's hard to stay on top of it. I'm in this business every day, and there's stuff changing. And so I'm really excited to turn it over to Alex and, just hopefully glean a little bit of wisdom and learn what's new and out there, and what parents need to know to really be effective in this process. And I know I keep saying parents, I know we've got some students on here as well. So Alex, with that, I'll turn it over to you and let you take it away.
Excellent. Well, thanks so much, Brock. And thanks, Kathleen, for giving a really excellent presentation there. I think that was, I know we sort of bowled over, especially the campus visits and understanding about demonstrated interest. That's something that to me is so not intuitive, that, they're tracking you and how interested you are in the school. And maybe at the end, there was a really interesting question about demonstrated interest and how you do so when you're not able to visit the campus, but you still really like the school. And but a great presentation. Thanks so much. And thanks everybody for being here and letting me talk for a little bit about, a passion of mine. And no, nobody's really passionate about the tests, although I am kind of a little bit, but I am passionate really about helping students to reduce the anxiety around these tests. And that's what this presentation is about. The best sort of combatant against anxiety in this test prep world is really information. The more that you know, the further ahead that you plan, the less stress that there is going to be around the process. And with the test optional sort of landscape that there is, that also adds another layer that it can be stressful because it gives sort of more options. And we're kind of living in the age of choice, where the more choices we have, sometimes the more stressful it is that we make the exact right one. But frankly, whether it's which school you go to or whether you take the test or not, or which test you take, ultimately, if you work hard and you plan ahead and you put effort into it, there are few bad roads and bad paths to take. So first thing to do as you think about testing is to kind of take a deep breath. Your student needs to take a deep breath and say, let me be smart about the way I go about this and work hard at it. And then that's what I can control. So hopefully this information helps a little bit in that planning process. So as far as a timeline of standardized testing, the first question I usually get from parents is, when should my student do their testing? And really, traditionally in the past, sort of as Tevi is going to tell you here, it's, you would test in the spring of junior year and then in the fall of senior year. That's sort of how it was in my day in the late 90s. That's what, our teachers told us, and that's what we did. And why would we do it then? One, math and maturity. Math, you've achieved, you've gotten all the way either through algebra 2 or pre-calculus generally, or calculus if you're on an advanced track. Maturity, a lot of students are just going to be a little bit more ready to commit to an extra academic endeavor and commitment beyond just going to school every day from 8 to 3. But in these days, when can a student test? Really, you can have it your way, because it is almost every month besides January, there is an ACT or SAT. So this year round, again, brings a lot of choices to your family, to your students, and allows you to craft a plan that fits your student's life and your student's activities. And when, there's a couple months of the school year when your student is just stressed to the max, going to bed at 1 a.m. every night. And this allows you to avoid those couple months and do your preparation and testing in a time that's not those 2 horrible months. So that's great about that. But the other side of that is that, again, it gives you these choices, and so that you've got to make some decisions around that. And that's what I'm hoping today will help a little bit with. As far as when they should test, generally the only considerations that you have around curriculum are going to be math-based, because English grammar, that you would have learned much earlier, and very few schools are actually teaching grammar at the 10th, 11th grade level. Reading comprehension, they're not testing you on any texts that you can study in advance. The science section of the ACT, while it might help to have done both chemistry and biology and maybe even a little bit of physics, it's not a make or break for that test score whatsoever, because the ACT science, sort of big secret that I'll explain later, is not really about science that you learn in school. And so really it comes down to math as far as a curriculum consideration for when you might want to prepare for your exam. And the SAT tests math that's a little bit less advanced. So you have a little bit more flexibility in terms of when you want to prepare and take your SAT, because it only goes through algebra 2. Whereas the ACT tests some concepts that are typically taught during the year of pre-calculus. So for students who are high performers on advanced math tracks who finish pre-calculus sophomore year, really the world is their oyster in terms of scheduling a calendar around their testing. They can prepare over the summer after sophomore year and test in the early fall. I also have students who might not be on advanced math tracks, but they just want to avoid the school year, and they prepare in the summer after sophomore year, and they test in fall of junior year. And that's become a more and more common test track. Certainly not everybody's going to do that. Not everybody has to start that early. It works for some students better, but that's part of that planning process and weighing all the pros and cons of when during the year is going to be the best for your student to take the test. Prepare when you have the time and the motivation to do so. I like to tell my students to think of test prep and taking the test as kind of a varsity sport. It's about the length of, your preparation and testing is going to be somewhere between 3 and 5 months. And so you can think of that kind of as a sports season, a little bit longer than a sports season. So I have many students who are fall and spring athletes, varsity athletes, and they want to avoid test preparation during those times. And so they put the bulk of their preparation in the winter, when they, instead of going to a practice every day, they open their SAT books or ACT books and they get to work on that. So that's a popular program as well. So really, you've got lots of options, and you've got to sit down with your student and saying, hey, when will you have the energy, focused motivation to prepare for this? We can go to the next slide.
Sorry, I'm answering questions.
No worries.
You know what, Alex, I might have you advance the slides, because I'm, if that works. If it doesn't, I can do it, but.
Sure. I don't think that I have that capability
Okay,
on
no
my
worries.
end.
Just say
Sorry about that.
next slide.
I'll give you a next.
Perfect.
So test option. I'm sure a lot of people are interested to hear something on this very specifically. So test optional, because it's not so new, but it's so new that it's so widespread. It's been around for some time, and understanding it right now, it's also evolving as we come sort of out of COVID, so to speak. There's also changes within each school. So I'm going to try to give you a bit of an overview on what test optional means for students today and tomorrow. But there's going to be a little bit further context that you'll have to delve into for your student to see if not submitting tests is an option for you. So there's three main buckets of schools. Tests required, which just like the old days require you to submit a test score. Georgetown was one of the first schools to go back to that, MIT, University of Florida. So there are some private schools, some public schools. University of North Carolina, went back to test required, but had a lot of public backlash and moved back to test optional. And so that also, you kind of think of maybe they're tipping their hand a little bit there. So if they were going to go test required, that means they probably value it quite a lot. Whereas there's going to be a lot of schools who are test optional and who really mean it. There's a lot of schools who have been test optional for quite some time. And so most schools right now are test optional. The majority of schools are test optional. So if that's a route that you decide to go that's best for your student or best for you if you are a student, you're going to have many, many, many great options that don't require a test. And then there are some schools, most notably the University of California school system, that are test blind. So even if you have a perfect score, you can't send it. They don't want it. They're not valuing that test. And so they're not going to include that test score in considering your application, no matter how good it is. So those are sort of your three buckets. Definitely that middle bucket of test optional is going to be the biggest one. Now, I've got Dr. Evil over here, and whether test optional really means optional, and that is complicated. So almost all schools who are test optional, they're doing a good job of having a unified message where they're saying, when we say optional, we really mean it. But to read between the lines, I think what we need to sort of read that as common sense people and as someone who's sort of seeing data come out is that if you have an exceptional application and you have a great GPA that fits that school's GPA sort of needs, and you have a great narrative and story and activities, and you fit that school, then yes, and they're test optional and you apply without a test, you have a very good chance. You have a good chance of getting in. The test will not keep you out whatsoever. However, I also want to tell parents to be a little bit wary of a student saying, all right, well, my dream school is Penn, and so I need a 34 ACT score to get into Penn. I can't get that, so I just shouldn't test. Because you're going to apply to more than just Penn. You're going to apply to 10 or 12 schools. And if you can get a score that's going to even help you with let's say the bottom half of your schools in terms of selectivity, then it's going to be important for you to have that score, because that's going to add to your application for at least those schools. And so what you're going to see is a lot of students who will get their scores and they may not send the score. If they're not a great test taker, they may get their score and not send it to their reach schools. And they'll send it to all of their likely schools and send it to some of their target schools, depending on what their counselor says about those particular schools. So that's where the context is going to matter. Now, I know I just gave you it's complicated, but I'll try to give you a bit more of some blanket statements here as far as who should really take the test in most cases and who really shouldn't. So as far as who should take the test, if your student takes a diagnostic test, and by that I mean the PSAT that most students take in October at school, or an ACT or SAT that a lot of schools will offer practice ACTs or SATs at the school. My company offers free SATs and ACTs if you come into our diagnostic test that we give monthly. And if you reach a 1200 on the SAT or PSAT or a 25 on the ACT, I would consider that in your first shot without preparation as marking you as quite a strong tester. And that with some hard work and preparation, you're going to get scores that are going to help you at some, if not all of the schools that you apply to. And so it would probably be to your detriment to pursue a test optional path. Who likely won't submit test scores? If your student, that same situation, they haven't prepared and they go in and they put a good effort on the diagnostic and their score is well below the national average of a 1050 on a PSAT, SAT, or a 20 on the ACT, and they have a strong GPA, and they have a strong narrative and they're flexible, they don't have to apply to any one school that might be test required, that is probably a student who's going to be better off going test optional. Now, I say this, if you decide early on that you see sort of the diagnostic testing and you know your student is a weak tester, but they have a really nice GPA and they're really great in some of these other ways, don't just say, okay, well, I don't have to do the test, goody. You have to replace that with something else. So if you're not taking the test, calculate how much time would have gone into that and put that time into things as a student that you really care about. Put that time into volunteering for a cause that means something to you. Put that time into starting a small little cottage business with two of your friends. Put that time into maybe taking 2 harder classes than you otherwise would have and stretch yourself a little bit for your to show your curriculum is as hard as you could make it. So don't think of test optional as like a get out of jail free card as a student. You have to think about it as a trade-off and say, I'm going to put these hours towards something that's more important for my long-term happiness and that takes a better advantage of my skill set. You'll also notice a little asterisk I put there on that 20 for that ACT score. I do have a lot of students who have accommodations. If your student has accommodations, has a learning difference, and they take a diagnostic test and they get an 18 or a 19, and they felt overwhelmed by the test, in that case, some of those students I've seen go up 10, 11 points, huge increases. Those students tend to, with good preparation, have larger increases because they are, when they go in for their first test, the length of the test and the nature of taking a test with a learning difference can be overwhelming. And so they underscore. Their diagnostic score will often be below what their ability level really is. And so they may be able to make greater gains than a student who goes in standard time, gave it their best shot, felt good about their effort, and still scored at that below that benchmark. So that's an asterisk there. For students who have accommodations, they may be able to see a larger rise in score and may consider following a test path, even if their initial diagnostic score is 18, 19 on the ACT. About the rest of us, as I said before, it's complicated. You really have to look at your GPA, your curriculum rigor, your narrative, the schools that you're looking at. And as I mentioned before, it's going to be dependent on school by school basis, whether you send your scores in. Likely, unless you're at the top and have amazing scores, you'll send everybody. Or if you're at the bottom and your scores are really poor and you're not going to send to anybody, most of us are in the middle and you're going to send to some and omit to others. And we'll go to the next slide, please.
Okay, coming up.
So the basics, and I'm going to go through this one pretty quickly because I want to make sure I get to some of the other sort of more complicated parts of this. But the ACT and SAT, they're 3.5-hour tests for now. The digital SAT is coming soon in March of 2024. That's going to be a digital test. It's going to be shorter, but they're 3.5-hour tests for now. All colleges except both the ACT and the SAT, there's no bias for either one. So you're going to take whichever test, or your student's going to take whatever test is better suited for their skill set. And we'll go into in a minute what those different skill sets are. How many times your students should take the test. I encourage my students to sort of pick a 4 to 6 month period and plan for 2 tests over that time period, with the third test maybe as a safety net. So you have your first test that you know you're going to prepare for and you're going to have your fundamentals down. You give it a shot, you have the experience, give yourself another 2 months to learn from that experience, continue to improve, and you take that second test hoping to knock it out there. But then also have in your mind, all this is about planning, that if you need that third test, if you get just my SAT math, I just know I can get 40 more points there. I'm happy with my verbal. I want 40 more points in math. Have that third test on the calendar if needed. So that's what I would say, 4 to 6 months, and plan for 2 to 3 tests. And then these are some links for registering for your SAT and your ACT. We can go to the next slide, please.
Okay.
As far as the ACT versus the SAT, I'll try to be brief in this. I'm sure a lot of parents, you've seen some different things on the internet, as far as little charts about the difference between the two. I'll try to give you the really fast and quick lowdown. The ACT is a much faster test. And that's really what it comes down to for most students, is I can read and process quickly enough to finish the ACT in time, in which case I'm going to be able to improve my skills enough and learn the content enough to do well on that test. Whereas students who cannot finish the ACT on time because it moves too fast for them, they're going to have a double challenge. They have to both increase their pacing while also adding strategy and content to improve their accuracy. And sometimes adding more strategy makes going faster even harder. So for students who cannot finish the ACT in time, it's probably going to be quite an uphill battle, and they may be better off with the SAT. So right off the bat, if you're taking a diagnostic test and that ACT just flies by, and you don't get to the last 10 questions of each section, you can probably put the ACT to bed as an exam for you. Now, math is a consideration. As I mentioned before, the ACT does test more advanced math. The SAT tests less advanced math. So for students who are in advanced math tracks, they have a little bit of a leg up, an advantage on the ACT, and you want to take advantage of all of the leverage you have in any of these tests. So if you have a strength, you want to exploit it. So that would be a second consideration to me, that math after number one, first and foremost, is definitely that speed. As far as personalities, as far as student types that tend to gravitate more towards one test or the other, ACT is great for students who are going to work really hard, learn the patterns. The ACT is a bit more of a learnable test because the patterns are more well defined. The SAT, on the other hand, is a little bit more subjective, interpretive, a little bit more reading heavy. And so now when you look at some of the bullet points, it might start to make sense how you have on the ACT, you have that worker bee, great studier, great organized student who can organize those patterns and learn them. And on the other hand, you might have a student who doesn't always know why they're right, but they can get to the right answer because they've got that good intuition. And that student might be better off on the SAT. It also so happens that the SAT, in my mind, to achieve improvement on both tests, the SAT, because it is a little bit more intuitive, there's a little bit less to study. So my ACT students tend to put more hours in than my SAT students, but I also think that they benefit more from that. So the ACT, in my mind, offers a little bit more ceiling for growth if you're willing to put the work in and you can go fast enough to finish the test. Whereas the SAT, if you've got a smart slacker who you know is probably not going to put the work in, but they're a pretty strong reader and have good intuitive skills, then that SAT might be a better test for them because they can probably accomplish more with a little bit less work. One more item to consider. I mentioned the accommodations before. If your student does have a neurodiversity, if they have either an IEP or a 504 at school or an ILP at a independent school, then the ACT with extended time tends to be an easier test than the SAT with extended time. So if you get extended time, the ACT will almost always be the better test. It is more straightforward, it is more learnable than the SAT. And so if you get that time, if you have the extended time, and that takes a little bit of the challenge away from that speed that I mentioned before as a number one factor, the ACT tends to be the better test. We can go to the next slide, thank you.
Okay.
Now, the digital exams, the digital SAT coming out in March 2024. This is for the class of 25. This is, some parents might not have even heard of it. I mean, I've read 5,000 articles about it because it's my industry and I see it every day, but the test is going to be shorter. It's going to be 2 instead of 3 hours. It's going to be, obviously it's digital, it's on the computer. They're going to try to make the math a little bit less wordy. They're going to take those long verbal passages and shrink them down to one paragraph and one question for each passage. The sections are going to be adaptive. So different students are going to receive different tests based on their in-test performance. And what that means is that as a student does, let's say their first 10 questions, the software will recognize how well they're doing. And if they're showing that those 10 questions were easy for them, they're going to get a harder set of questions than the student who struggles in those first 10 questions. The reason for that, there's a lot of that goes into adaptive testing. It's been part of the GRE and GMAT for some time, but it allows for one test to sort of separate people a little bit more, so that it's kind of unfair for an MIT bound student to take the same test as somebody who's struggled in math since the crib. This way, it sort of creates more groups. And so if you're in sort of that lower group, maybe you're not an MIT kid, but within your group attacking simpler questions, you might be able to show some strength. The other difference, the SAT, it's going to stay in the 1600 scale. The same math content is going to be tested. The testing will still be at school. So a lot won't change, but the format will change a little bit. And it's changing because the College Board believes it will be easier to take and administer. So it's easier for them, cheaper for them to do. They think it's a better fit for today's students, which is, that students like computers and students like shorter tests. You might tell, I don't necessarily think that's the best way to go about it, to sort of shorten passages because students don't want to read 5-paragraph passages anymore. But the College Board, they surveyed many thousands of students, and there was a resounding, as you might imagine, a resounding win for shorter passages and shorter tests. And they're hoping that the adaptive testing allows them to separate students by score in 2 hours, as well as they did in 3 hours with a traditional test. The ACT, as far as going digital, they've already been digital abroad for a couple of years. Then they've talked about going digital. So it's almost certain that they will go digital within the next 5 years. It's just a matter of whether it's 2 years because they want to be kind of on par with the SAT, or if they want to let the SAT, be the guinea pig, see where they fail and push it back a couple of years to go to 4 years. But the ACT will get there soon. And as far as for the rising 10th graders who are sort of going to be those guinea pigs, what I would say, it's always hard taking a new test because it's difficult to prepare. The tests, the SAT College Board will put out materials to help you prepare digitally for the test, but it's going to be a change. And so change is always hard. What I would say is that if you're on the fence and either test is a possibility, go with the known evil, the ACT. If you're a slow reader, however, consider the SAT. And if you're a student who might be a good tester, but know you're not going to have time to prepare, then maybe take the new test, because all the kids who have time to prepare are going to take the ACT because it's the known evil and they know they can prepare for it and they know how to prepare for it. And so against the SAT, you may be facing sort of a group of students who are a little bit less prepared and who are going to put a little less time in. We can go to the next slide. Thank you. And I'll kick it back to Kathleen for as far as what's next.
All right, Brock, do you have any words that you, Alex is kicking it to me, I'm kicking it to Brock.
Fair enough. Fair enough. That's the phone a friend version, right? So
Exactly.
what I would say is this: I'm gonna wrap up my thoughts with, I'll call it so what, right? So Kathleen talked all about the process, and I would classify it as finding the right fit. And as I was pouring through the questions there, lots of questions around, well, my student has this SAT score, or here's this. Look, folks, there is no perfect way to do it. All of these are sort of recommendations, right? Take it with a grain of salt, right? Enjoy the journey. Right. Our goal is to give you some tidbits of wisdom and advice. There's plenty of stress around this process. Don't create more stress. Right. And so I would say, as you think about what Kathleen was talking about, enjoy the journey. Right. She talked about, if you can make an acquaintance with the admissions rep who's going to read for your state or your high school, get to know that person. Somebody asked a question about, do I also need to get to know the financial aid officer? Well, if you're going to apply for financial aid, I'd say it's probably a good idea, right? Alex was talking about, various scores. And there was one question, I think the specific number was, is 1,300 a good SAT score? Well, it depends, right? At some schools, you're going to be at the top of that stack with a 1,300, right? At other schools, you might be an average score with a 1,300, right? And somebody else had a question in there that said, like, with test optional, it seems like what's being reported, the average at these schools is like 1,400. It's crazy. Maybe that's true. Don't sweat it. Do what you can. It's like, I was telling Alex and Brian, who's off screen here from Alex's team, and Kathleen, I coach my son's little league team, and we had baseball practice tonight. And I always say to these kids, it's a great day to get better, right? That's my line with them every day. And I think apply that to this process. Do a little bit, maybe not even every single day, but do a little bit at a time. If you can improve that SAT score or ACT score, right? It's going to help you with the stuff that we do on being able to qualify potentially for more merit-based aid, right? And it might also mean that, as you're looking at schools, again, maybe that little bit higher school, maybe it gets you admission to this school that maybe today is a reach school, but maybe in the future it becomes more of, I don't know if there is any sure thing these days, but maybe a higher likelihood. But I would just say, enjoy the process, do what you can do. I love the work that we're doing, and I know Alex and Kathleen do as well, because it is so cool to work with these young people who are sort of at the threshold of the rest of their lives. And I say that in a way that's not like, like burdensome, but it's just such an awesome opportunity, and just, seeing what's going on and the opportunities that they have available to them. And so with that, I don't know, we were even seeing lots more questions come in, and I'll try to get to some of these. I want to wrap it at 8 o'clock, but by the same token, or 8:01, and by the same token, if there are questions in the Q&A, Kathleen and Alex, are you guys good to stick on for a little while longer with the,
Absolutely.
the informal portion? So if you've got to go, if you've got to do dinner or put kids to bed, totally get that. I'll just remind you, please take 90 seconds, fill out that survey that should pop up in your browser. Or if for some reason it doesn't, you can go to the website, CFC, as in College Funding Coach, cfcsurvey.org. I'll put that in the chat as well. Just give us your feedback. That'll open up the mini vault, which we've got tons of resources. You can calculate your expected family contribution. You can look at the schools, loads and loads and loads of information. We do these type of webinars usually twice a month, and probably 30 times a month, we've got our little known secrets of paying for college webinars. So with that, again, Kathleen, Alex, really, really appreciate your time tonight. We'll stick on. For those of you who have time, or if you asked a question and we didn't answer it, stick around. We'll get them answered. I just want to be respectful of everybody's time if you do need to go. So we'll wrap there. I was watching these things come through. We've got 23 new questions as I was saying that. So lots of people saying thank you. So thank you for that. But by the same token, we'll try to get to some of these questions. So let's see. So, hey, in no particular order here, Ms. Barber asks, my child's a freshman. Should he start making outreach to various colleges now to start marking when he showed interest? Kathleen, you want to take that one?
Yeah, I can take that. No, I wouldn't start that in 9th grade because your child really doesn't know yet what he, she, or they wants to do. I think it's a perfect time in 9th grade to do kind of what we talked about, just the casual exploration. If the family happens to be visiting family in Florida and you're near Eckerd College, go check that out just to see what it looks like or just what's helpful. The demonstrated interest really doesn't come into play too much until junior and senior year in high school. And if your son or daughter or child signs up right now for all these colleges, their inbox is going to be just inundated.
High school kids love that though. They're going to get mail at home. It's going to be awesome.
Exactly. So it will be inundated. And that means that a couple important emails, maybe from a teacher or something, might not get through. So I would delay. Demonstrated interest is more for junior and senior year. And remember to not at big state schools, just at small to medium. And while I'm on that email thought, have the tech savvy person in your family or at your school help your child set up a filter so that college emails go to one folder and they can check that folder, a couple times a week, but they don't have to. We all know the feeling when you open your inbox and it's inundated, and to start that every day, no one needs that.
Yeah, I've even said, create a separate, Gmail account or something like that, right? You might have, I'm Brock Jolly. So maybe it's jollyfamilycollege@gmail.com or something like that, right? That it all goes there. Obviously, you got to make sure you're checking it.
Right.
So that's critical. But I think that's great. And I think too, just on the, the freshmen with the college visits, I would tell you, it starts to plant those seeds in kids that, college is sort of that next step. And it's, I don't know if this is the right word, but it's sort of the expectation that eventually they're going to spread their wings, right? And again, 4-year college is not right for every single family, right? So I'm not trying to say that, but like, what's that next step? And what are you doing after college? And start planting those seeds. And guess what? Maybe they will get more involved, do a few more extracurriculars, study a little bit harder for that chemistry test, these type of things. And then, lo and behold, actually get into some of these great schools that we started our conversation with this evening. How about, Kathleen, this is probably for you as well. And if you've answered it, let me know. But Paul asks, how do you talk about being a neurodiverse student in your college applications?
Okay, yeah, I didn't get a chance to answer that yet. And very impressive to be using neurodiverse. You're my kind of people. That's excellent. Yes, a lot of my background has to do with kids with learning style differences, who I've happened to notice are some of the most creative students ever. So there is a spot in the common application that says additional information, and the colleges straight up, the reps tell me just to put in there a quick little paragraph. I have dyslexia, and this is what I do in order to, this is what I need to succeed. I use book on tape, I did whatever it is, or I have ADHD and my grades were not reflective of my ability, ninth grade year. But since then I've learned how to work within that, and I'm doing well. A mistake that students often make is to write about learning style differences or neurodiversity in their main essay. And while that is a part of the student, it is not the whole student. So it's better to save the essay for something else, that's really super important, that's something that defines the student, and talk about neurodiversity in the additional information section.
That's great. Thank you. Alex, question from Jonathan. Will students still be taking the SAT at schools, or will the online testing mean students will be able to take the test individually at home or other locations? What does it mean for students with small group or one-on-one testing accommodations?
Students will be taking it at schools. They will not be taking it at home like you did the AP exams during the pandemic. They will be at schools for the foreseeable future. And then as far as accommodations, the College Board has promised to continue to offer accommodations, small groups, so that shouldn't be disrupted at all. The only thing that's up in the air is that there are some students who have, whether it's sort of text sensitivity, or they need larger type, or they need to write kind of on paper. The question is whether they'll be given a paper test or not. And the College Board has been very wily about that. And they've said, we will continue to support our students in all the accommodations that they need. However, we will not provide a paper test. So take that for what it's worth. But for almost all students, you will be on a computer and you will be at a school, whether your school or a school in your neighborhood.
Just real quickly, I saw Ryan just put something in that he had to join late. The answer is yes, this is recorded and we'll get it out to everybody. You just have to complete the survey. So we know that if you complete the survey, you'll get a copy of the recording. So this is that was a question from John. This is a question from a different John, but also for you, Alex. If your student were to take the SAT as a sophomore, for how long are the SAT tests valid? And I would also add to that, there was another question in the chat that I would call the super score question, right? Of just, sort of schools allowing for super scoring.
Great. And so to the first question, I did see actually a few questions on that about whether a student could take it in ninth grade or 10th grade. And you can take it at whatever point in high school that you're ready. That score will still be valid. And so you want to take and actually I've had some students who were way advanced in math and they waited like everybody else to take the test junior year, by which time geometry and algebra 1 were 4 years ago for them. And they actually had a lot of trouble and required of course, they were fine in the end, but it took them quite some time to review all the math, because it was so much easier than what they were doing in their class, but it was quite some time ago. So there is some benefit if your student is on an advanced math track. That's part of your planning process and thinking about, my kid may take the test at a different time than other kids. If he's ready mathematically, if she's mature enough, if they're prepared, that they have a good time to take it, that's really the time to take it. It's a lot of flexibility and options. And then as far as super scoring goes, the SAT is super scored at most schools. Only a small minority don't allow super scoring for the SAT. And what that means is that when you take the SAT, you get a math score and you get a verbal score. So if you take the test twice, you get 2 math scores and 2 verbal scores. And super scoring means that you'll send the schools both of those tests, and the school will count the better of the 2 maths and the better of the 2 verbals and put them together, even if they weren't on the same day. The ACT has 4 subjects, and a good number of schools, and it seems to be increasing every year, not as many as the SAT, but I'd say more than half, and Kathleen can correct me if she doesn't feel that way, but I'd say more than half of schools now also super score for the ACT, which means you can take the test a couple times and you'll have multiple of each subject, and you can mix and match to create your best super score composite score. So that is what super scoring is. Almost all schools do it for the SAT. Fewer, but still a majority of schools do it for the ACT. As far as how many times to take the test, I think that there was a question there that was related to that. So they, kind of a question I get a lot is, okay, well, should I take the test 8 times so that I can then eke out a great super score across those 8 times? One, don't put your kid through that. And if you're a student, don't put yourself through that. But also there are some schools that will ask you to send all of your scores. And if you got a score and it took you 8 tries and somebody else has less access to the test and they took it once and got the same score, what does that say to the admissions officer sort of about those 2 students? What I would say as a rule of thumb, as I mentioned before, try to plan for 2 to 3 tests. If you absolutely have to take a 4th one and you're going to prepare extra and have a good chance of increasing your score, yes, take that 4th test. And one just tiny little factoid that I'll throw it in there, that all of that with the ACT, you can expunge tests. So there's a little bit of a loophole there that with the ACT, if you take a test and you don't like your score, you can expunge it and it disappears. It's out. It's in the ether. It doesn't exist. You can't send it to school. So then you got a little bit of a loophole for the Georgetowns of the world that say, send us all your scores. We want to see all of them. If you've expunged it, it doesn't exist and you can't send it. So there's a little bit of that loophole for the ACT that can allow you a bit more flexibility into taking that test more like the 3 to 4 times than the 2 to 3 times, whereas the SAT, you can't expunge scores. So for schools that ask you to send all scores, you're kind of on your honor to do so.
Kathleen, here's a question. Kiki asks, I think this could probably be a whole 1-hour webinar on its own, but she says, can you explain the early decision pros and cons?
Absolutely. So I'll just do a quick explanation of what early decision is in case anyone in the audience doesn't know. Early decision, you can apply to only one college under that plan. It is binding, which means if you get accepted, you must attend, okay? And if you get accepted, you also have to withdraw any other applications that you have out there before you've heard. So why would people do this? And that, I think, is your question. Because at many schools, it can be easier to get admitted through early decision. There is, if you can look at data for different colleges, the College Funding Coach has data about that too. Excuse me, now I'm calling my company your company. This is amazing. Okay, so early decision can make it easier to get in. I would say at the Ivy Leagues, that's negligible, that it's really hardly a big advantage there, but at very competitive schools, it can be. The other thing to consider is what percentage of the class they take early decision. Schools like Vanderbilt and Northwestern take almost half of their class or right over early decision, which of course means there's less spots available for regular decision. So those are the advantages for early decision. The disadvantage is that it can impact merit aid, which would be bargaining with merit aid, which is a question that Brock could take on if he chooses to, or contact.
Yeah, no, it's exactly right. I mean, the whole thing's a process, right? And I think, go get those great SAT and ACT scores, right? That's a bargaining chip, if you will. No pun intended, Alexander chip. But it is a bargaining chip that you have. And what we do is we take all of this and say, okay, how do you sort of package the student and help the family determine, okay, how am I going to save on the front end and pay for the education? And it's a combination of savings and cash flow and maybe need-based aid and merit-based aid and all of that coming together and building that timeline for a family. And again, it may be different depending on the schools, right? A state school might cost this, whereas a private school, some of the schools that we've discussed, might cost this. I mean, there's over 50 schools now that are more than $80,000 per year. We've also talked on tonight's webinar about community colleges, right? I just was at a graduation party last Saturday for a student who's going to do 2 years of community college and then already knows where he wants to go for his next 2 years after that to finish up his degree, right? It's not right for everybody, but I think for a lot of families, certainly from a financial perspective, it makes a heck of a lot of sense. And sometimes from a student maturity perspective, it makes a lot of sense. And so just figure out what's right for your kid. And again, as we said before, enjoy the process and figure out the game plan. Let's see, sorting through some of these. Again, I see another question. Happy to share the recording. Love this. My rising senior is going to love working on his essays. Somehow I feel like that's a little tongue in cheek there. Kim says, create a message direct to kids and I will gladly fund this. I love that. Okay. I think you may have answered this a little bit, but just a question about hours of volunteering or work. I mean, my take would be there's no perfect answer, but anything to add to that?
Yeah, no, you're right. There's no perfect answer. And, just as parents say, well, what score does my kid need to get on the ACT or the SAT in order to get into this college? There's no prescription. So really it goes back to your student doing what she or they loves and appreciates. If they are very into volunteering and community service, that's wonderful. There are colleges out there that will offer scholarships for community service, or put extra emphasis on it when they're reading applications. Like Tulane, for example, is very big on community service. But I wouldn't, force your child to do community service if that's not his or her or their cup of tea. Instead, I would, if it's required for school, wonderful. If they want to do it, wonderful, or do a little bit here, a little bit there. But I wouldn't, I wouldn't put a lot of emphasis on that. They're going to look at the whole package and what the student in particular is interested in, and what have they done to explore those interests.
Yeah, there's another question in the chat about high school sports, right? And look, if your kid's playing, 2 or 3 sports, I mean that's like a full-time job in some cases, right? And so to balance it out, right? I think balance is the key. Schools continue to want to see, well-rounded kids. I mean, this is sort of a debate, but I think, look, they don't want something that where, they have, they've done one thing and they've been, not deeply involved and, kind of mailed it in. Is maybe a good way to phrase that, right? I mean, if they're super passionate about stuff, they want to hear about that. If they're doing 2 or 3 sports, the colleges will understand perhaps that, they didn't have additional time to be able to volunteer 1,000 hours while they were in high school. So just my advice, and not my area of expertise, balance it out. Let's see. Alex, what's the average prep time for the SAT if doing a once a week type of session?
Sure. So a bit of an open-ended question, because of course it'll depend on, the student and their needs and how much they're looking to grow, where their starting scores are, et cetera. But if we sort of take a, faceless student and we say, what would really help a student get prepared for an exam? If we look at that kind of 5-month model and think, okay, if we were to look at a winter program, the student starts in November and they might take the February and April ACTs. Over that 5-month period, they may have a lesson once a week for an hour, or once every 2 weeks for 2 hours, and expect to put in maybe 3, like my students will put in anywhere between 2 to 4 hours of homework per week. And that depends. The busier students can only fit in 2, and the students who have fewer activities can put in 4. And it really is just going to depend on the student. So I would say in terms of total weekly time commitment between time with a tutor, or just if your student is preparing independently, they should consider it kind of a 3 to 5 hour time commitment per week over the course of, let's say, 3 to 5 months. And then you can think what that looks like on the low end, what that looks like on the high end, and you can sort of make that calculation.
Thanks, Alex. We had a parent who said, and this is really common, said, really bright student, great grades, all of that, but tank the SAT, right? My unsolicited advice was pretty good reason to talk with Alex and his team at Top Score. They deal with this stuff all the time, right? Because it's very common. But just, any advice for maybe helping to build back up the confidence of this student moving forward?
So I answered that a little bit in the chat, and
Okay.
and my business development guy was really mad at me, but I said that might be a student who is just perfect for test optional. It sounds like if you have a great GPA and you have great activities and things you're passionate about, and you stand out in a lot of other ways, and this is the one piece that just doesn't show your skill set at all. That's one of the groups of people that test optional is kind of made for. And so I think that you've got to weigh and talk with the student really openly and say, if this is something where you want to overcome this challenge and overcome this hill, then yes, companies like mine can help them achieve that. But also you might look at the times and say, we've got a window. We don't know how long that window will be open to apply test optional. And as at least colleges are telling us, we're on equal footing. So let's, again, use that time wisely and throw it into some great adventure or endeavor that's going to make you stand out on paper much more than building that SAT score. If you tanked it, you're probably not going to turn around and be an amazing test taker. You're going to fight and claw and become a good, solid test taker with help of someone like me. And the question is it worth it to do that? Or do you strengthen the other parts of your application? And I think that's kind of a conversation to have with your individual student. And we do that. We have that conversation a lot of times with students who score really low on our diagnostic tests. We talk about, and we have other programs, project-based learning programs, where we help students to identify with their skill sets, what can they do in terms of internships or jobs, and how can they build their narrative and their story in a way that the SAT is not doing for them. So that's what I would say, is that you don't have to build her confidence when it comes to test taking. There is another route, and that might be the right route for her.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I think too, again, I'll go back to my 8-year-old baseball team that I coach, because I think the advice is pretty universal. And that is, if you've got something that for whatever reason is a weakness or you didn't do well, guess what? Tomorrow's a great day to get better too, right? And how do you get better? You practice it. You figure out, Alex and his team have developed these tips and tricks and little things that you need to do that, by the way, they're not teaching in the high schools, right? This is not stuff that is natural. And it's, how do you become a better test taker? You learn how to be a good test taker and you practice it. So Heba asked a question that is up my alley, and that is, when do you apply for merit or need-based aid? I would tell you it's sort of two different answers. On the merit-based aid, never too early to start, right? And what I mean by that is we're talking about all this stuff that sort of comes on the kid's shoulders late in the junior year, over the summer, and into the senior year. Lots of stuff in terms of applying to schools, essays, etc. And so often kids get accepted at these great and sometimes expensive schools, and mom and dad say, we can never afford that, go apply for scholarships. Okay. And some of you may remember being second semester high school seniors. And my guess is that you were not particularly motivated to go out and apply for college scholarships. Guess what? Your kids are not going to be any different. So my point is, catch them on the early side, right? If you've got a freshman or a sophomore or a junior, there are scholarships out there for which they can qualify before their senior year. Not all of them, right? Read the fine print, read the details, but there are scholarships out there. We had a student, I always use him as an example, about a decade ago. He qualified for a $25,000 scholarship as a 6th grader. He won a national science fair, won a $25,000 scholarship, right? The envy of all of his classmates, I'm sure. With regard to need-based aid, it's a different, and by the way, on the merit-based aid, you're going to write essays for some of them. Oftentimes you can use that same framework that you're using for those essays when they're applying to colleges, right? So maybe you're kind of killing two birds with one stone. Again, that's Kathleen's area of expertise. With regard to the need-based aid, generally speaking, you're doing that at the same time as the application. What will generally happen at most schools is you're going to find out an answer. And again, this is not a universal piece because it's sometimes rolling admissions. But generally speaking, you're going to get your offer of acceptance, because nobody ever gets declined, right? You're going to get an offer of acceptance, and then shortly thereafter, if not simultaneously, you're going to get the student aid report that will tell you exactly what that aid package is going to look like. Different conversation for a different day is all of that at some level is potentially negotiable, right? And so that's sort of their first line in the sand. So long answer for a good question there. But again, this is how all this stuff comes together, and it's how our 3 independent organizations really collaborate with families to help them get the best outcomes possible.
Hey, Brock, sorry to interrupt. We have a couple questions in the survey. A lot of them are about how do they get the link to the
which link?
Sorry, the link to the recording.
It will, as long as you do, you have to do the survey to get it, right? Everybody who completes the survey which will pop up. And Kathleen, if you want to bring up again the slides, I think
Sure.
it's slide 25 has the QR code. So if you've got your mobile phone or iPad, you can point the camera at that QR code that Kathleen's going to bring up, and that'll take you directly to the survey. Or you can go to cfcsurvey.org, or when you log off of Zoom, it will pop up immediately in your browser. So any one of those three, when you do the survey, once we get everything kind of cleaned up in terms of the recording and everything, we'll send it out. We'll send the link out to everybody. So I expect everyone to watch it time and time again, and recommend it to all your friends. I'm just seeing if I missed anything else. We could go for hours and hours, but I want to cap it at some point. So anything, Alex or Kathleen, anything you guys saw in these?
Well, I think, Alex, I'll let you say something first, and then I'll say something.
Oh, go ahead, please, Kathleen.
All right, I was just going to say there are lots of fantastic questions in the chat. I want to invite anybody who has college-related questions to go to the collegecoaches.com website, and I'm going to ask Brian if you can type that into the chat. And my email is kathleen@thecollegecoaches.com. I'd be happy. You can set up a free 20-minute intro call to ask, questions about how we work with families. Because I don't think it'll be possible to answer all these questions. We try to get them all, but if we didn't get to yours, I apologize, but it's trying to balance 200 and some people with questions. So that would be the good way to get more college questions answered. And you can go to our website and explore. We have several different coaches and offer everything from essay help to college lists and everything in between. But I will defer to Alex now for how best for people to get in contact with him as well.
Yes, our website is topscoreedu.com, and Brian will, I'm sure, throw that in there as well. If you email us at advisor@topscoreedu.com, he'll put that email in as well with any questions that you have. It's also a good way to get in touch with us and to set up also sort of a call to hear a little bit more about what we do. And we're always really, hopefully helpful at providing advice and counsel, even sometimes if you don't need the SAT and you don't need us, but maybe also think about, what your courses are coming up this year, and maybe your student can use support. One thing that I always tell students is that as they're entering a junior, senior year, or even sophomore year, if they're entering an AP class, they haven't done APs before, if they're entering an honors math course, that may be a bit of a stretch for them. As we're entering summer, this is very relevant. In August, it's a great time to sort of pre-prepare for your school class. And so if you can find out what are going to be those units in the first couple months of a fast-moving class, it can make that first month of a tough year a lot smoother and easier. So if you've got a teen who's a little bit lazing around in August, and getting prepared for a fast-moving class is a great way to help boost their GPA and frankly their confidence at the beginning of a year, so they don't feel like they're in a hole.
That's great. If I can just ask one more question here, this came in, and this is the benefit of being a friend of the moderator here. So my friend Heather asked, are there any tips about what colleges tend to look for if a student is applying as a transfer after their first year of college?
Yes, as after a transfer, each college has different regulations for transfers. Some credits will transfer, some won't. Some colleges will ask for a current professor recommendation, some won't. The Common App, if you go on to the commonapp.org, they'll have a transfer app right there, and it'll walk you through all the steps. But the best advice that I could give you about transferring is to find the person at the college who is in charge of working with transfer students, and have your child reach out to that person, maybe do a Zoom with the person or do an in-person meeting, because again, that personal connection can be really, really helpful. But at a lot of colleges, they're very transfer friendly. They want students, and students leave freshman year for a host of reasons, wasn't a good fit. They ran out of money, or they made a bad decision and were asked to leave the college. So that's the number one thing for transfers, is take a look and see who's in charge at the college of transfers. Also, with the essay, why do you want to transfer? be sure that your child does not bash the current college. Instead, say, you can say, although I've enjoyed my experience, I enjoyed my experience here, I've now know that I'm looking for X, Y, and Z in a college. So we don't bash the current college. Instead, we focus on the specifics of the next college and why it would be a better fit.
That's great. All right. I know, like Kathleen said, we've got probably, I don't know, 5 or 10 more questions in there. A lot of them we've sort of covered tangentially. So, but I do want to make sure that Kathleen and Alex have a little bit of their evening. So we'll cap it there. If we didn't answer your question, Alex, Kathleen, and I, all three have put our emails in the chat. I'll give them to you just one more time. Mine is bjolly@thecollegefundingcoach.org. Kathleen's is
Kathleen at thecollegecoaches.com.
And Alex?
Advisor@topscoreedu.com.
Got it. Perfect. So please feel free to drop us an email. Let us know how we can help. You reach out to any of us. I think all three of us, offer sort of a free consultation. So the idea is, look, if you're at the, and I think too, you can kind of enter the process through any one of our organizations, and we love to collaborate on this stuff. So if you're saying, oh man, I've got a rising junior and we really want to focus on the SAT, give Alex's team a call, right? If you're like, I've got a rising senior and I have no idea where to start, and I, have done the SAT, but we've got a list of 72 colleges that my kid's considering, Kathleen's probably a great place to start. If you've got a rising kindergartner and you want to start saving money for putting money aside, or you're that panicked parent of a sophomore or junior or even senior or even kid already in college, it's never too late to really start figuring out how to save and pay for college as efficiently and effectively as possible. So with that, we've still got over 100 participants on the line, so I always feel badly, but hopefully this was time well spent. I know we're already a half an hour over time. Let us know what we can do to help. Please do take 60 seconds, complete that survey. You'll get lots of stuff for free in our mini vault. If you've got any questions or need anything, please don't hesitate to reach out to any of our three organizations. Alex, Kathleen, thank you both very, very much. You guys are just a continued vast wealth of knowledge. We appreciate all you're doing. So with that, wish everyone an awesome summer coming up, and hopefully you can spend a little bit of time in the academic world and doing a little bit of legwork to make the process a little bit easier as you go through it. So with that, thanks everybody. Have an awesome night. Appreciate you. Stay safe, stay healthy, and have a great night.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Take care. Thanks for joining.